1. For background, this girl, Amy, took a dislike to me quite quickly, and I honestly don't know why. I thought my university people would be a bit more mature, but apparently not. In our first year, I overheard a few talking about taking a trip and who could be potential drivers. My name was mentioned as I could drive, and Amy instantly shut that idea down. It was a bit like being in Mean Girls with cliques. Another time, Amy called me up in the middle of the night to call me a rude and mean name and hang up on me. I would sometimes get lunch out with a mutual friend in between classes, but was sworn to secrecy so she would never find out. The mutual friend was worried Amy would be upset and kick off if she knew. Again, I have no idea what I could have done to upset her, as I didn't really have many interactions with her. Anyway, fast forward to our final year. We had a debate as a class assessment. We weren't originally paired together, but changes in circumstances meant we would be paired for the assessed debate. We worked together on the debate, and she even apologized for the late-night call. It went quite well, actually. We made a pre-plan on how the debate would flow in general, and discussed our basic points and arguments. We were on opposing sides for the debate, but it made sense to have a plan, as it was an assessment. We shared our personal notes with each other, too. I did pick up on a mistake on her notes, but I didn't tell her, as I could dismiss the argument in the debate and give my point a stronger case. Debate day came, and I was ready for battle. I didn't trust her in the slightest, and it showed in my counter-arguments. Her first point was the one with the mistake, so I quickly shut that point down, and that set the tone for the rest of the debate. Whatever she said, I made a quick fire back, and was the most assertive I have ever been in my life. I'm not sure who was more surprised, me, Amy, or the lecturer. News spread fast. I barely got through the door before my housemates asked me what I had done and that Amy was upset. A few days later, the other lecturer told me he heard what happened, and was smirking when he said it. I got the impression he wasn't a big fan of Amy. I'm so glad I got to have my moment, because for our entire course she looked down on me for no reason. It felt good, and I got a better mark than her, which was a nice little bonus too. 2. This happened many, many moons ago. The day of my 28th birthday, I wound up in the ER, because all weekend long I'd been dealing with nausea, dizziness, fever, and lower right quadrant abdominal pain. That all just kept getting worse. When I got back to see a doc, I described my symptoms for the umpteenth time, of course, since they never seemed to read the notes, and the doc orders a CBC before he even starts the exam. He, of course, then starts poking and prodding at my abdomen, which I do my best to relax and breathe through. I still wind up making pain noises, but I do my best to let him do the exam without hurting him back. I know that other women can verify that annual physicals can be extremely painful for some of us, but we've learned to deal with it. For me, I was told that tensing up would make it worse, so I should practice breathing through the exam and doing my best to relax my whole body. By 28, I'd had lots of practice. You'll see why I mention it shortly. The doctor went off to do whatever he needed to do while he waited for the blood work to come back. Once he read the report, he wandered back over to me. He tells me that my white cell count was only slightly elevated and that, since I wasn't tensing up much when he was poking and prodding, that he didn't think it was appendicitis. I explained to him my history of painful exams and also let him know that my body likes to hide things. For example, I was dealing with massive back pain, and they only found out that my back was actually broken when they decided to go in and do a fusion. It never showed on the scans. Fast forward past about 20 minutes of arguing back and forth. I could go in and do an exploratory, but if I'm gonna do that, I may as well take out your appendix while I'm in there. Okay, let's do that. I have a request, though. Can I have my appendix in a jar so I can see it? Sure, I can do that, no problem. I wind up in surgery at 4 a.m. the next day. Once I'm fully awake after surgery, the nurse tells me what happened. I guess they didn't care much for this doc's attitude either. The day after that, the doc is doing rounds with med students in tow and comes to my room. Cue PettyRevenge. Hey doc, where's my appendix? I'll come back later and talk to you about it. You're here now, just tell me. Well, we got lucky. How so? We managed to get it out right before it burst. Wow, I guess you'll learn to pay more attention to what your patients tell you instead of acting like you know everything just because you have a medical degree. The doc in the ER was actually the surgeon on duty and not just a standard ER doc. No clue why he was dealing with my case from beginning to end. It may be simple boredom on his part, or he just finished up a consult, I have no clue. I referred him as ER doc because I was in the ER and he's the only doc I dealt with. So ER and doc just stick together in my head. 3. I'm sharing my story of a bad doctor. I'm thankful to still be alive. I had gone to a primary care guy for years and he seemed nice enough and very mellow. Perhaps a touch conceited, but that's par for course, right? I had to get referrals to an ENT for a deviated septum and allergies. This is during the pandemic when doctors were definitely overworked. Then I had ulcer symptoms that got really painful when I lay down to sleep and went straight to the ER. I had a great experience there, a CT scan and some blood work, and they said that they would treat the ulcer symptoms, but that they were more concerned about the masses in my lungs. Recommended I come back in a few weeks to recheck. I followed up with my GP immediately after, per their recommendation. 2 weeks later, I can hardly walk and have lots of joint pain and my eyes are bloodshot. I get in with my GP again because my CT rescan wasn't due yet. I have to take an Uber because my wife is working and I'm in too much discomfort to use a brake pedal. The doctor's staff are very empathetic and helpful. I'm very polite and grateful that they could squeeze me in during the pandemic. Enter the doctor, and I hand him a list of my symptoms and their timeline, asking him for his recommendation and help since I'm in pain and falling apart. He glances at my list dismissively, sets it down without really reading it, and says that he no longer wants to be my doctor and that I should pursue concierge medicine, where I can get the level of attention I require. I was caught completely off guard. Important to note that we had never had a conflict, and I don't have a history of drug abuse or hypochondria. I had been a fit, healthy patient without demands or drama, routine stuff, and I'm a polite person. He sends me packing, no help and no referral. I've been fired as a patient. I couldn't believe it and didn't know how to respond, so I called an Uber and headed home. My wife is an epidemiologist and couldn't believe it, and she had helped me draft the list of symptoms, which were severe. She takes me to the ER, and the CT scan shows that the lung masses have doubled in size. I'm admitted to the hospital that night and given huge doses of steroids. When they take off my pants, I have red sores all over my legs that were not there that morning. I'm deteriorating rapidly. A lung biopsy, skin biopsy, and blood workup later. I'm diagnosed with a rare form of vasculitis, called Wegener's disease or GPA, granulomatosis with polyangiitis. In the 1970s, people didn't live longer than 5 months on average, until treatments were developed in the early 80s, by none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci. I am in the hospital for a week, in the oncology ward, where the nursing staff were outstanding and the doctors on rounds as well. I get out and start my infusion treatments and prednisone regimen. The revenge? Lawsuit? No. I reached out to the practice he worked for and went to the top. Put it all in writing and stated that he may not be such a good physician for actual human patients in need. Informed them that he was putting their entire business at risk of major lawsuits, and a desk job may be more appropriate for him. They call a meeting with him that I'm not privy to. I hope it was a wake-up call for him. Being a physician isn't for everyone. 4. Many years ago, I worked at a company that manufactured medical and scientific testing machines. Think shakers, small centrifuges, etc. I originally started there as a machinist, until I hurt my knee at work. 8 years and 5 surgeries later, and it's still not fixed. After my injury, I switched over to the assembly side because that was much more accommodating for my new limitations. Long story short, I was very good at my job, coming up with new ways to streamline several processes, new ways to assemble various things quicker than before, generally doing more work than my job description called for, and even having the temerity to prove the engineers wrong on multiple occasions. With everything I could do, I knew it would require the company to hire at least 3 people to replace me should I leave. It was announced one day that the assembly manager was leaving that job, whether for another position within the company or the company altogether, I don't recall, and anyone who was interested could apply for it, with the promise that inside personnel would have the inside track over outside applicants. I put together my resume and went for it. The son-in-law of the company's owner was doing the interviews, which I aced. He went so far as to tell me that my resume was by far the most professional and complete he'd ever seen. But I didn't get the job. No hard feelings, I just went back to doing what I had been doing. Well, as it turned out, they hired a friend of the owner's son-in-law as the new assembly manager. So much for that inside track, huh? It seemed to me, as well as my co-workers, that we weren't even at the same racecourse, but whatever, I could deal with it. I don't know what that guy's previous work experience was, but it became abundantly clear very early on that he was out of his depth. He had no clue why, and how things were done the way they were, but he decided a couple of weeks after his hiring that he was going to change everything about the assembly area. One of the things he decided was that we were no longer allowed to exceed the number of machines assembled per day, nor were we permitted to skip over machines to get to others, regardless of the issue, engineering issues, bad parts, wrong parts from the warehouse, etc. Some of those parts came from the machine shop inside, but many from outside companies too. But we also weren't allowed to stand around waiting for new parts from the warehouse. We couldn't even get with the warehouse personnel to help find parts we needed or help them get the parts into our assembly area. No more doing more became our mantra. Productivity and quality plummeted. Needless to say, none of the assembly team was happy in the slightest. I tried, I really did. But I did have issues with not doing things to the best of my ability. I also have issues with not being able to fill my workday with work. You know, what I'm being paid for. I would be the absolute worst person to ask about quiet quitting. A few months into the AM's tenure, my station was at a standstill due to an engineering problem with the new variant of a machine that I could practically build blindfolded. I had 4 or 5 college-educated engineers crowding my section, attempting to figure out a problem that arose only after the machine was fully assembled, which I explained exactly how it could be fixed with minimal effort, by the way, and I was correct, but that's a different story. While waiting for the engineers to come to the same conclusion as me, they did, eventually. I went to the warehouseman responsible for pulling the parts I needed to assemble, and asked him to switch over to a different machine I was going to build. The AM happened to wander over just then and asked what I was doing. I explained the situation with the engineers, and that I was currently unable to work on those machines, and rather than standing there looking lazy, I was trying to get a jump start on the other machines I needed to build that day. At no point did I get sarcastic, which is my normal mode of communication, or mean, nor was I flippant in any way whatsoever. I was merely trying to get some work done that we both knew needed to get done. He starts loudly berating me in front of the entire shop, both the assembly area and the machine shop, specifically saying, "You're not allowed to do more than what I tell you to do in the order I tell you to do it." I placated him as best I could and went back to my work area, which was still overrun with engineers, and settled down for a long wait. Cue the malicious compliance. Because I didn't work on another machine for the rest of the day, not because I didn't want to, but because I was told I wasn't allowed. A couple of hours later, I was called into the AM's office for a meeting. I was expecting another stern talking to, which I could handle, being ex-military. I had long grown accustomed to being chewed out by people who didn't know how to do the job I was doing. What I was not accustomed to was getting a write-up for trying to do my job, especially since the official reason was insubordination. The AM didn't even have the courage to do it himself. He foisted it off on my immediate supervisor, who wasn't involved in the prior situation and had no idea what had happened earlier. I think he was busy putting out a different fire. When he asked what happened that justified my first and only write-up in the 2.5 years I'd worked for the company, when I explained it to my supervisor, all he could do was shake his head in disbelief. He was a good supervisor, at least when it came to getting the best out of most people, but he also wasn't really known for rocking the boat to stick up for his people. That said, when he tried to get me to sign it, I refused because I obviously disagreed. He said he understood, but he'd have to talk to the AM about it. That did not go well. I could hear the yelling half a building away, despite the machinery running. Once again, I was called to the AM's office, but this time I was facing the AM. He immediately started yelling at me again, but not just about the earlier incident. Now he wanted to know why I hadn't built the day's allotment of machines. I coolly reminded him not only was there an engineering problem with the machines I was supposed to build, he told me not to work on any other machines, and to do so was insubordination, as he so callously put it in the write-up. Then he asked me if I was going to sign the write-up. Once again I refused. I don't think it's right or fair to be reprimanded for doing my job.
If you don't like it,
he said through clenched teeth,
find another job. I can find 1,000 people who can do that job.
I never said otherwise, jackass. I was fed up now and refused to tamp down my anger any longer, but you'll need at least 3 people to do everything I can do as easily and as well as I can. Good luck with that. I left him standing there, completely flustered, went to my work area to gather my personal effects, walked over to my supervisor, informed him that I was going home and would like to use my accrued PTO and vacation time for the next 2 weeks. He told me it was no problem, as he was approving my request. I let him know that I was also giving my 2-week notice and wouldn't be back. He shook my hand and wished me well in my future endeavors. I did the same and left. I got to leave in my terms, and through my son, who also worked there, as well as various friends I'd made while working there, I did learn that the company had to hire no less than 5 people to replace me and my expertise. I also got the last laugh, because I'm pretty sure the AM got fired a couple of years later for various reasons, not least of which was the lagging productivity and his driving a mass exodus of the best personnel in the assembly area. 5. So I'm a 19-year-old woman, and I quit my crappy job at a fast food chain that has a certain arch recently, and remembered this story, which I thought was funny. Unfortunately, this is a very true story, and I know it's a bit ridiculous. We had these regulars that would come through the drive-thru near enough every day, and I was always the one handing food out the window. They were an older couple, and I was happy to make accommodations to allow handing them food and drinks easier. However, it became increasingly difficult to allow their awful attitude toward me. For context, my branch of the restaurant was one of 5 in my town, but the rest were 20-ish minutes away. We were the worst rated as we were small but extremely busy as a result, and run by literal teenagers half the time. Lunch and dinner rushes were a mess, as managers were more concerned with stats than actually running the place well. This couple would come through at our busiest time, order the same thing, shouting at the order taker, payment window, and me for how slow we were. Our small kitchen was unable to accommodate how busy we got, so wait times were often 300+ seconds, supposed to be 120. Every time they'd yell at me for how busy we were, how slow, how their food would be cold, how it wasn't fair to make an old couple wait, and every time the man would ask for extra cream on his latte, and if he didn't get it, he would become irate. I would do it for him, because I had learned to take the bullet for taking too long rather than deal with this guy. So much so, he would call me his creamy girl. Ew. With a shit-eating grin on his face, and every time I'd laugh but explain that it wasn't appropriate. On this day, I was maybe 16? 17? We were flat-out busy, 600+ seconds, when the cream couple arrived. I asked them to pull into a bay, and we would bring the food out so we could serve the next customer, whose order was prepared. He went ballistic on me, refusing to move, shouting at me, slamming his hands on the dashboard. Classic temper tantrum and refusing to move. This went on for so long, I started explaining to my manager the issue. who wouldn't take shit, the situation, and she phoned the police to remove the guy. This is usually enough of a threat to get the customer to go, but not this time. He said something along the lines of,
"Every time I come here, we have to wait and my cream melts. And every time we come here, you're working. You are an awful person."
I'm not the kind of person to take crap from people. You get the energy you give, but up until now, I had been forgiving. So I blurted out while he was yelling at me, "So, go somewhere else. It's called problem solving, dude." He was stunned before lashing out again, explaining this place was the only option, and there was no way I could make him go anywhere else. So I said, "Wanna bet?" Latte and extra cream in hand, I poured the coffee all over the roof and window of his Fiat Panda. I was going to pour it out the window, but he was parked too close. But I was thinking about it, and I realized that I could safely pour it onto his car window and roof and not burn him. I then asked him again to pull around and his order would be ready soon, and slammed the window. I then promptly burst into tears out of exhaustion and hate and began making my way to the manager to tell her my crime. The police turned up basically straight after. We explained what was going on while the cream man was trying to open the window. They asked him to go and explained he was now trespassing if he didn't go. Long story short, next thing I saw was this 70-plus man swinging at this copper before quickly getting put into the cop car, leaving his very frail wife still sat in shock, latte-less. Did this man deserve to get arrested? Probably not. Was it appropriate for me to pour coffee on his car? Maybe, maybe not. You decide if I'm the asshole if you want. Either way, it felt good. Plus, I didn't lose my job. Oh, before I go, just some other crappy things that he would do to explain my seemingly over-the-top reaction. He would throw a temper tantrum if we were too busy to top up his extra cream. If there wasn't enough cream, we would have to remake the drink. The coffee machines could take 2 minutes to pour sometimes, and would then complain about how long the order took. Often he would ask me to add like 5 packets of sugar to his pre-syruped latte, which I would happily accommodate for if we weren't busy, but also remind him there was like 3 pumps of syrup in there already. He would then complain it was too sweet and accused me several times of adding more sugar than he asked for. Remaking the drink would ensue. This was not the first time he refused to park up either. Sometimes he would, so it wasn't even that he didn't understand the concept, like some didn't. But I was always happy to reiterate what he had to do. Worst of all, he would personally blame me if his service wasn't good enough, even if I didn't have anything to do with the drive-thru. My best friend was working on my day off, and he apparently started screaming for the pink-haired girl to apologize for ruining his order when I was at home. I know I overreacted. I'll own up. But this is borderline abuse? Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to Revenge is Ice Cream, episode 319. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Before you go, please press the like button to let YouTube know you enjoyed the video. It does help them recommend it to other people. Alrighty, I don't think we have any other business, but let me check. No, we're all good for today, so let's move right along to Hellfreezer's question of the day. And today's question is, and this one comes from my moderator, Shigar. Is Die Hard a Christmas movie? And I think this comes from the argument, is it a Christmas movie or a movie set at Christmas? Because it can be both, it can be one or the other. I think, for me, personally, Die Hard is definitely a Christmas movie. It's something I enjoy watching during the holiday time. I would even argue that Batman Returns, definitely a Christmas movie, that sort of thing. But other opinions are allowed, so why don't you let me know what you think in a comment below. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.